Good Tuesday evening to you, Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for coming back and visiting with us again. I'm Jamie Beckett, AOPA Foundation. You Can Fly Ambassador in Florida. That barely fits on a business card. Over there on the left coast is the great Kay Sunrum, who represents the whole Western United States. And in the middle, who would you leave that responsibility to but Pat Brown, the inimitable Pat Brown. Thanks for being here, both of you. I appreciate it. Tonight, we're going to be talking about flight reviews and instrument proficiency checks. But of course, in keeping with our normal rules, you can ask us questions in the chat about anything you want, any topic that involves aviation. But we're talking about flight reviews and instrument competency checks because all pilots need a flight review, and instrument-rated pilots need instrument competency checks, or at least should go down that road every now and then. Kay, it is wonderful to see you tonight. How's everything out in California?
It's going great. I got to fly yesterday and today, and so whenever I get to fly, it's always a great day.
Outstanding. By the way, those of you out in interweb land, give me a thumbs up if the weather is good where you are. Give me a thumbs down if you're in one of those places where it's snowing, sleeting, hailing, high winds, things like that. We were having this discussion with our producers, Donnie McKay and Rebecca Boone, before we started. And by the way, round of applause for Donnie McKay and Rebecca Boone. They're the ones that make us look like we know what we're doing. I'm in Central Florida where the low for the coming week is about 88, and they are expecting a freeze. So, Dave Champness, I'm glad you're having good weather. That's fantastic. Jose, nice to see you. In Miami. Yeah, Miami's okay. Well, hey, we were going to talk about flight reviews. Pat, that's of course going to be 14 CFR 61.56, maybe one of the most misunderstood regulations, in my opinion, because people think this is a test. And really, a flight review is nowhere near a test, is it?
No, it's not a test, and it's not anything that you can fail. Worst case that can happen on a flight review is your CFI may say, you know something, let's work a little bit more on those crosswind landings or something like that before we call it a day. And maybe let's get together tomorrow and do something like that. So you can't fail it. Worst case scenarios, you just might not get to sign off that same day. Not a big deal. And after all, we're talking about safety, and you may be carrying your family in the airplane, or maybe if you're carrying somebody you don't like very much, that's not a big deal. But we are talking about safety. So if you're not quite up to snuff, your CFI rightly should say, nah, not today. Let's fly tomorrow and get it done.
And that's not the worst thing in the world, because Kay, it really is continuing education. Like a realtor has to go back and do continuing education so many hours every year or two. So many professions require that. And for those of us who fly, there's a lot that changes in the regulations and the way we depict airspace. Even back in '92, the airspace itself changed. What kind of stuff do you look for when you're a client, not the CFI, but when you're a client and go to a flight review? What kind of things are you hoping to learn?
Number one, I want to make sure that I'm absolutely proficient in the airplane that I'm flying. And currently I fly primarily a 172 and a Cirrus. And so the last couple of years, my flight reviews have been in those airplanes, but I try to do something different each time, and something that'll push myself beyond my comfort level, because it's a learning opportunity. That's what flight reviews are. We never get to the point where we say, okay, I know it all. Even Pat, you can't say that. You can't say I know it all. We all are continuously learning, and this is a great opportunity to focus on certain things that you just want some practice on. And so for me, for example, I don't get that many crosswinds landing opportunities, especially at my home base, where the winds are almost 99.9% of the time they're down the runway. They're from the ocean, and I don't get to practice crosswind landing. So flight reviews are, I would say, 10 out of 10 times I do a flight review, I tell the instructor, I really want to go somewhere where it's windy and I want to practice crosswind landings as part of the whole package.
Well, I suppose you're out in the west where there's mountains, where you could be down at very near sea level at some airports and up in the mountains and others, and that density altitude change is going to be a different. Eric Pittman specifically says, hello, Jamie. I paid him to do that, just so you know, above board. I give him $20 every episode to act like we're friends. And Bernard C., no more snow, still freezing. Bernard, where is that? And I'm really sorry, because freezing doesn't work for me. It just doesn't. Pat, I generally go to different outlets to get flight reviews. Sometimes I fly with an old friend. Sometimes I fly with somebody I've never met. Who can give that flight review? Do I have to go to an established flight school? Can I use somebody from the flying club? Can I go with a DPE like you?
Well, first of all, let me just say that Kay burst my bubble. I really did think she knew everything. And Kay, sorry, Kay, just it disappointed me. But no, you can go to anybody, any certificated flight instructor. Could be your friend. It could be a colleague. It certainly could be a DPE. Could be a flight school instructor. Could be a flying club instructor. Really, everybody that you mentioned right there. Personally, I have a good friend who is a CFI, and we typically do each other's flight reviews, and we delight in torturing each other. And I mean, genuinely torturing each other, and putting ourselves into situations that so could, because we don't talk about it in advance. So I never know what he has up his sleeve for me, and never know what he has up his sleeve for me. But I find that to be plenty challenging.
You know, Eric Pittman comes back with a question, Pat, you just addressed, and Eric is habitually late. He's probably at work right now because he worked at public supermarkets and they're open till 9. So he's probably just ducked into a back room with his phone. But good question. Can you fail a flight review? And no, you can't. There's no way, as Pat was saying. The worst thing that can happen is when you get back on the ground in the debrief, the CFI says, maybe we want to go over that slow flight a little bit more. You were sloppy, or maybe we work on some pattern work. But if you succeed in a flight review K, there's an endorsement that goes in your logbook that says you've succeeded. If you don't, it's just recorded as dual received. So there's really no downside, is there?
Right. And that takes the stress off too, because nobody's going to say they enjoy taking a test or an exam. Nobody. And so a flight review is not that. It's an opportunity to learn, and that's all it is. And like you said, if you're not ready for that sign off, then that just means you have to come back maybe another flight. It might be another 2 more flights, whatever it takes to meet those standards.
Well, I'll tell you, like Pat, sometimes I fly with a stranger. Sometimes I fly with somebody I kind of know. I have gone with friends, and maybe my funniest flight review story is I did one in a Tecnam Twin with Jason Shappert. And Jason and I are friends, and maybe you and Pat and Kay, maybe you can relate to this. The thing's just got great performance. I mean, I fly a 152 a lot of the time, sometimes a 172. This thing just got up and went because it's got 2 Rotax 912s. It's got great performance. We're up at 6,500 feet. He's putting me through maneuvers. I'm just having a great time, and I've lost the thought I'm doing a flight review. I think I'm just flying with a friend. And he says, hey, let's go over there by Tampa. And I'm like, sure. And the fuel shutoffs are on the ceiling on the P2006. And I didn't realize when I turned my head, he shut the fuel off. And I roll into a turn, and the engine quits, and a Rotax 912 shutters when it quits. So there was a moment of what the heck was that? But yeah, I mean, it's not about being perfect, is it, Pat? It's about being involved, doing that 1 hour of ground, at least 1 hour of ground, doing that minimum 1 hour of flight, and really learning about the process. How could I be a better pilot in whatever I'm flying?
Yeah, even on a check ride, perfection is not the standard. It's in the ACS. Perfection is not the standard. Perfection is not achievable. We have talked about this in the past. Perfection is not achievable. Consistency is achievable, but perfection is not. You can strive to be perfect, and that's okay. You're setting yourself up for disappointment. You can strive to be consistent, and you can achieve that. And consistency, in my mind, means, for example, you're a specific distance away from the runway at 1,000 feet on the downwind leg, not 1,050 feet, but 1,000 feet, realizing that we're all human, but we're adjusting and trying to correct it and make it right without obsessing on it, because you can certainly obsess on that too, but retarding the throttle at approximately the same place in the traffic pattern, adding your flaps in approximately the same place, and looking for a specific speed profile, which you attain by making sure your throttle settings are proper and your pitch attitudes are proper as you're going through these various configuration changes. So perfection is not attainable. Consistency is. And again, even in the ACS, it doesn't say that perfection is the standard. If it was, none of the three of us would be here for sure. Well, Kay might be. Jamie, I know you wouldn't be.
But, no, not even close.
But
no. Hey, in the comments, if you've ever taken a flight review, ever, in the comments, go ahead and give me a thumbs up or just say me. Let me know that you've done that. I will tell you, Pat, along with your point, I once did a flight review with an FAA examiner because I am a masochist and I was a young instructor, and I thought, gee, that'd be a good thing to do. And I'll out myself so that nobody thinks I have ever flirted with perfection. We're flying a PA-28 Piper Cherokee, and we're right over the airport at 4,500 feet, and he fails my engine. He wants me to do an engine out landing. And I immediately pulled in full flaps. Not a clue why I did that. That's not the appropriate thing. Immediately knew I had screwed up, and I took them out in increments. Did fine through the rest of the maneuver. We're rolling out on the runway after landing. And I said to the examiner, I have no idea why I did that with the flaps. And he just said, yeah, I wondered about that, but you dug it out. We're fine. You can make a mistake as long as you remain PIC, as long as you learn from that process. I suppose, Pat, to some extent, it's kind of like a check ride where if the CFI doesn't have to take it for safety reasons, you're probably doing okay.
Yeah, it's all about recognizing the mistakes that you are inevitably going to make in a flight review. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to make some misjudgments. You're going to forget something. You might be off altitude or off heading or something like that. But, in real life, in the real world, you're going to correct those things, right? So why should that be any different than in a flight review? You're off, just acknowledge, correcting, and fix it. Flying an airplane by hand, and autopilot's a different thing, but flying an airplane by hand, it's all about correcting back to normal or correcting back to the standard. I don't care how well you fly, you are constantly making small corrections, just like driving a car. The thing about driving a car is, all of us have done it for so many years and so many hours behind the windscreen. You're driving along like this, and you're not even recognizing the fact that you're kind of doing this little bit to keep the car in between the lines. Don't even realize it. And at some point in the airplane, it really becomes almost the same thing. You're making these little tiny corrections. That right rudder goes in when you lift off. You don't even know you're doing it. Yeah. So I don't know how we got off onto that tangent, but at any rate, yeah.
Well, Kay, maybe it's worth remembering that unlike a check ride, and certainly we've all taken plenty of check rides, where you're trying to demonstrate your mastery of a maneuver, that you can do this within the standard. In a flight review, it's an educational experience. So, for instance, I've done flight reviews in seaplanes and land planes, Super Cubs, J3s, 172s, 182s, singles and twins. I did a flight review in a Stearman once because I'd never flown a Stearman. I thought that'd be a great experience. It isn't at all like a check ride in that sense. Would you agree, Kay, that we're going out to learn something? And if I'm sitting with an instructor and learning about it, the limitations or benefits of a certain aircraft, and then going out and learning them in the air, that's an educational experience that counts as a flight review.
Absolutely. You can go into a flight review in an airplane that you don't normally fly. That is perfectly fine. It's an opportunity to learn. And so take advantage of that time and try to go with an instructor, or even if that person is a friend, but someone who's going to put you through a workout. Don't do a $100 hamburger and call it a flight review, because that's a disservice to yourself. You're required every 24 months. Most flight schools and flying clubs require an annual flight review, and we at AOPA recommend that you do a flight review 6 months or every year if you can. And so do that with an instructor that is going to really put you through a workout and where you're going to learn something.
You
Yeah.
know, one,
Go ahead, Pat.
sorry, one thing that I don't remember seeing in our show notes here, but one thing is keep in mind that wings credit. If you complete a phase of wings, that's good for a flight review. So if you don't want to have to sit down with a CFI for 2 or 3 or 4 hours or whatever it might be, every couple of years, every 24 calendar months to be specific, then get involved with the wings program, FAAsafety.gov. If you're not a wings participant right now, it's easy to do. Just go to FAAsafety.gov, create yourself an account, and presto, there you are. And just tell your flight instructor that you want to do this under the wings program. The other little secret, or not so secret really, about flight review is it can be anything you want it to be, anything that you want it to be, as long as it conforms to 6156, which basically talks about understanding Part 61, and then an hour of flight, minimum of an hour of flight, minimum of an hour of ground. But beyond that, it can be anything that you want. I routinely ask pilots when I do flight reviews for them is tell me where you think you're weak. And believe me, I have things that we can do if you don't. But
Mhm.
But tell me where you think you're weak, and then I'll point them to the ASI side of AOPA's website, and I'll tell them that I want them. I'll give them 2 or 3 courses to go through. Each of them take about 20 minutes or so, and then I'll tell them, so do these 3 and any other 2, for example, that are on ASI's website, so they can pick and choose what they like as well as what I want them to do, and bring those certificates with you to our flight review. And so it helps that we can review that stuff, and it helps me get an idea of where their weaknesses are, and it actually kind of cuts down on the ground school time oftentimes because they've already done this homework.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Tiffany Sams is with you. She loves the wings webinars. By the way, I have to point out, when I was a kid, I had a pen pal named Christopher Sams in England. So Tiffany, if you're related, I'd love to connect again. And if you're not, I'm glad you like the wings seminars, because they really are great. As you point out, Pat, they really illustrate you can focus on different things, just pattern work, just cross country, radio communications, whatever you feel you're weak on. Dave Shampness says, has his first flight review due next month. Dave, I hope you'll let us know how it goes. And remember, if I can offer a little advice, you're the client. And I'll tell you, Kay, I don't know, maybe you do it this way. I always start flight reviews with a conversation. We just sit down and talk for a while, and I want to know, what kind of flying do you typically do? Because if you typically fly out of a non-towered airport, we're going to go to a towered airport. If you generally fly, within 50 miles of home, and you never go beyond that, and you fly a champ, and you're never going to go beyond that, I'm not going to get you up to 8,000 feet and try and get you to do a long cross country. I'm going to focus on things you actually do. Do you do something similar, Kay, or how do you deal with the individuality of the client?
I always talk to the student well in advance of the flight review. And like Pat said, I'll ask, what is your weakness? And if you can't come up with it, I'm sure I can come up with an agenda. And from there, we just discuss what type of flying they do. Some folks are around here, they're in the mountains a lot. And so that component of the flight review absolutely has to deal with performance, density, altitude, those kind of topics. Other folks, maybe they just do a lot of long cross country. I had one student who was planning to fly into Oshkosh and just wanted to focus on, hey, this is something so different for me. Can we somehow incorporate into my flight review some preparation for me to go to? Now, obviously, we're not going to Oshkosh as part of the flight review, but we certainly talked a lot about cross-country flying. And so we'll have that conversation at least a week or 2 before the flight review. And then I like to send material over, just email links and say, hey, take a look at this and let's talk about this in depth during the ground portion. And so this way they have some material to review. And if they have the time, like for example, for the performance, I'll say, do these calculations and let's review it. And so that's really important to do some of that prep work. And don't think of it as homework. If they don't get it done, that's fine. We'll discuss it during the flight review. But the more you can do ahead of time, then the more valuable your flight review will be. And you're paying for the instructor's time, so come as prepared as you can to get your biggest bang for your buck.
Yeah, Bob Benson, I'm going to come back to you in a minute on your very good question about basic med and type 1 diabetic. Jose, Pat, I'm coming to you. Jose says, if I'm receiving instruction at the time my flight review is due, does this instruction count as a flight review? So let's say Jose's working on his instrument certificate routinely with an instructor and his flight review comes up. What's your stance on this?
Absolutely. You betcha. As long as you have that conversation with your CFI, make sure that he or she understands that you intend to use this flight instruction as a part of the flight review requirements of 61.56. And so as long as some of the ground school portion that applies to whatever instruction you're receiving covers the minimum of 1 hour on Part 61, then again, you can absolutely. So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is make sure that you discuss it with your CFI to make sure that everything will basically conform to what the regs say.
Yeah, I was saying when I do a flight review, I typically sit down with the client for a considerable amount of time. I'm not going to get it done in less than an hour. And we're going to have a long, extended conversation. I really want to know what they're thinking of. The flip side of that is, as Pat was just saying, if you want to do your flight review with an instructor, make sure you explicitly say that, because there's a very specific endorsement they need to add to your logbook. There may be one pre-printed in your logbook that they can just sign and put the appropriate information. But you've got to be on the same page when you go on that instructional flight. So yeah, you could do it as part of your instrument training, but both the applicant and the CFI have to be on the same page and know what we're talking about. Kay, I'm going to come to you with Bob Benson's question, because it is a great question, and it really does bring us into a discussion of AOPA resources beyond the FAA. AOPA was a big proponent of basic med. More than 10% of the pilot population now flies under it, including myself. And I'm going to throw out there that there is the Pilot Information Center. So if you're an AOPA member and you can call in to the Pilot Information Center, we have medical professionals on staff who can answer this question. But Kay, what's your perspective on this type 1 diabetic using basic med? Any issues?
I don't know what the regulations with diabetes and basic med is. So I'm going to pass on that question. But I'm going to say, call the Pilot Information Center and ask about that.
Yeah, I can. If you want me, I can take a swing at that.
I'll let you do it, and then if need be, I'll come in and correct you, because as we discussed, I know everything.
Well, okay. Well, the first question I would have, before I can really answer that question in any kind of depth, would be, do you currently have a medical? If you currently have a medical, then you just simply let that expire, go to your doctor, and as long as your doctor is willing to sign you off as being healthy enough to fly, and of course your type 1 diabetes is under control, then off you go. But if you don't already hold a third, second, or first class medical, then you'll have to get at least a third class medical, and then you can let that expire. But you'll have to have a special issuance for type 1 diabetes. You do not have to have a special issuance for it if you qualify for basic med. You don't have to have a special issuance for diabetes. That's not one of the qualifying conditions. So the first question really is, do you currently hold a medical? And with that, I will turn it back to our esteemed leader.
I was just going to say, I do have a friend who is a type 1 diabetic, wears a insulin pump, used to have a third class medical under a special issuance, currently flies under basic med. So I have every confidence you can do that, Bob. But seriously, go talk to your family practitioner, take the online course for basic med, and talk to your general practitioner, or call the AOPA Pilot Information Center. But you do have the option. This can work. By the way, if anybody watching is a CFI, let us know in the comments there, because we're going to come to this. This next portion actually is beneficial to everybody, including CFIs. Kay, you really like the focused flight review, which allows you to have some structure and guidance. You're not out there on your own trying to figure out how to do a flight review, or as the client trying to figure out what are we going to be doing. So how did you get caught up in focused flight review, and what do you think its great benefits are?
Well, first, let me tell the audience, in case they don't know what a focused flight review is. It's basically an opportunity to go beyond the basics of a flight review, and you're going to use AOPA's Air Safety Institute's flight review profiles. So you choose from a series of tailored lesson plans, like mountain flying, takeoffs and landings. There's seaplane operations, and then you work on what you, and this is capital YOU, what you want at your next flight review. And so this is a list right here of 8 different topics, and I've done 4 of them. I have not done seaplane and helicopters because I don't have any operations in that right now. Hopefully I will later on, but I really enjoy doing these. And this is what you do. You choose a flight profile from one of those 8. And then you can see up at the top right, there's some quick links here. You can share that profile with your CFI. You just click that and it'll send an email to your CFI with the little intro about AOPA's focus flight reviews. And then it'll go through this tailored lesson plan for that topic, that profile that you picked. And then there's another link there that has resources, and that's a great link. And even if you're not doing a focus flight review, folks, I suggest you go to this website here, and it's Focus Flight Review. You can do a search on the AOPA website, and then click that additional resources, because that'll give you a lot of information and what to review for your pre-flight materials. Then the next step is, you meet with your CFI like you would in any flight review, and then you fly that focus flight review. So it's pretty simple. And what I like about it is that a lot of the legwork has been done for the CFIs. So all of you CFIs out there, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. These are topics that are very, very common, like the takeoffs and landings and the fuel engine systems, weather, CFIT, what was the other, positive aircraft control. These are very general topics every pilot needs to really master. And then the nice thing about it, and I pulled out one of the ones that I did, and this is in your resource link, you can print out a knee board copy of the list. And so it always starts off with departure, then airwork, arrival, and what are the pertinent tasks to be completed. So you know what they are ahead of time. Your CFI knows because you've emailed that link. So your CFI has this, will print it out and come to the flight review with it. And then on the back of it is where they make the endorsement. So thank you, Tom. We did this one back in 2019 on takeoffs and landings, and it's nicely organized. So I recommend trying that if you haven't done so already.
I like it. By the way, Tiffany Sams, the proud Irish Tiffany Sams, is working on her CFII. Are you a CFI, Tiffany? I got to ask, because my initial was a CFII. I was a double I, then an MEI, then a CFI, because Pat, I do things backwards. It's just my way. But, Kay, you made me think of something that I don't think has ever really consciously come to mind before in relation to a flight review. What if you're buying a new airplane? Or what if you've joined a flying club that has an aircraft that you typically haven't flown, or maybe you've been flying 172s and now you're into a 182? That transition process can be flight review worthy, where you can work with a flight instructor to get up to speed, because as we go up to more complex airplanes, we get away from just turning the fuel on or off to where we can select from sometimes multiple different tanks. I mean, you can use that educational experience and say, that's my flight review, as long as we said earlier, you and your CFI are on the same page, and that's the goal, to get you up to speed on this aircraft and sign off your flight review. Life is good. Tiffany Sam says, yes, she is a CFI. We are not alone, Pat and Kay. There is somebody in the audience who shares our pain, understands the right seat and the challenge of teaching somebody how to do things in the air. I love this. Tiffany, welcome to the club. Mark says working on his private pilot license, it is a certificate. I feel compelled to say that, but I know we call it private pilot license. And he really appreciates these sessions. Mark, trust me, we appreciate you every bit as much as you appreciate these. We actually talk about these sessions in between them because we really enjoy doing it. If not for y'all, we would have to be home with our families, and that's just not going to work out. Kay, beyond the flight review, and we touched on this. Oh, wait, there is one other thing I wanted to touch on. It didn't organically come up, but I feel compelled to say it. Pat, if I come to you and I want to do a flight review, but I say, I have access to a full flight simulator, I'd like to do it there. Can we?
The answer is maybe. It's a very definite maybe. No, seriously. There are a whole bunch of regs that cover that, and I don't want to get into the weeds by reading them all, because trust me, they're right here. But if you look at 6156, paragraph I is in India, and then subparagraphs 1, 2, and 3, that gives you a lot of information right there. You can also look in part 142, at 142.59. and then 61.4 and 61.64. There may be some others, but those are the ones that I found kind of in a quick cursory search. So the answer is maybe.
Mm-hmm. I'll take that. We've got an interesting question from Bernard C. It says his friend let his medical expire. He was in a car accident, was prescribed pain medications, which he took for a while, then stopped. His AMA, I think he means aviation medical examiner, said he cannot get his medication back. How long must he wait to pass? I'm going to give you two options. One of them Kay mentioned earlier. If you're an AOPA member, you can call the Pilot Information Center and talk to a medical professional who can advise him on this. The other option is have him make an appointment with his aviation medical examiner for a consultation, not for his medical. There's doctor-patient privilege in that. Nothing goes to the FAA. He can have a discussion about what his needs are, what his health status are, what plan they might make, and how they might go about it. So there are options. You don't always have to be going to the aviation medical examiner after filling out MedExpress for your medical. You can just talk to people. And
there's also the option of basic med, depending on what his friend's occupation is.
Yeah. Yep, very true. By the way, Eric Pittman, very witty Eric Pittman, says, Pat will now read the FAR AIM cover to cover. You think he doesn't do that, but I can tell you he does. And Glenn says this could cure insomnia. I may need you later, Pat.
Hey, Jamie, one thing I wanted to comment, we were talking about potential for special issuance on basic med and questions on that.
Mm-hmm.
If a pilot is not sure about a medical condition, rather than going to an aviation medical examiner and finding out there, please come and talk to AOPA, the Pilot Information Service first, Pilot Information Center, because then they can help you with kind of navigating that path. Whereas if you go to the AME, then things are going to get documented right there.
Yeah.
So talk to AOPA first before you go and see an AME.
By the way, I feel since our primary topic today was flight reviews and instrument proficiency checks, and we'll get to IPCs momentarily, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the AOPA You Can Fly Rusty Pilot Program. And I know, Pat, Kay, you may have heard of this. I've been dabbling in it for the past 8 years. It's actually a great way to get up to speed. It counts as the ground portion of your flight review. It's the webinar version is a little over 2 hours long. The live version is 3-ish hours, but very entertaining. It's participatory, and it really does cover a lot. You know, Pat, one of the things that has fascinated me in the last couple of years, I've been having corporate pilots and airline pilots show up for Rusty pilot courses. Even met a guy up in Pensacola who was Blue Angel #1 twice. As far as I know, the only person to do that, went on to a career with FedEx. got back into aviation through the Rusty Pilot course. So it's not a dumbed down, gee, you're a remedial student, you need this, or you haven't flown in 40 years, although that would work, you can use this. There's very proficient people who come to that course because it's top-notch content presented by 3 very engaging professionals, if I may say. But Pat, you've had experience with it as well, okay? But Pat, what have you found that the Rusty Pilot really is productive for people who are either preparing for their flight review or have been out of aviation for a number of years and want to get back to it?
Absolutely. There's a lot of folks who come who are current. I've had some seminars where more than 50% at times are current pilots. But the key is you have to relearn things, and repetition is the mother of skill. I say that all the time. Repetition is the mother of skill, right? And so current pilots that come, they walk away with something new, and also the opportunity to get to know some other pilots, and because it's typically at an airport, a flight school or flying club, except for the webinars. Of course, that's a little harder to interact with, but the ones that are in person, there's a lot of current pilots that come and they ask good questions, and that's the nice thing about an in-person seminar for Rusty Pilots is that dialogue, and some of those questions are beneficial to everybody. So if you haven't attended one of the Rusty Pilots, definitely get on the calendar and sign up.
Yeah, and Pat, I mean, that networking potential is really valid. And thank you very much, Rebecca, for putting up rustypilots.org. That's all you got to do. Put that in your browser and you can find out what's coming. That networking part is great, Pat, but so is the ability to ask a question as you go through this situational thing that we do with a flight from Sarasota, Bradenton to Sebring, Florida, up to Kissimmee, which, by the way, covers every type of airspace except Alpha. That ability to just say in a casual environment, hey, can you back up and talk about what does lineup and weight mean? That's kind of great, isn't it?
Yeah, the live ones are really good that way. Although we really do make an effort on the online webinars to make it as interactive as possible under the circumstances. But like Kay, I have had professional pilots come. I've had active airline pilots and active corporate pilots come in, and part of the reason they come in is because they may just be getting back into flying little airplanes after a career of flying big stuff, and all they've ever done in the last 20 or 30 years may have been flying in class Alpha or class Bravo airspace, maybe class Charlie every now and then, but they got no clue what G and E would be, and just some of the other general stuff too, because again, they always have their hands being held by ATC. Nothing wrong with that, but it's a different type of flying. And just as I would be very uncomfortable in the left seat of a 737 or something like that for a while, it's going to be the same thing when you have somebody that's been in a 737 for 30,000 hours getting into the left seat of a 172. It's a different animal.
Some airline pilots that I've had attend a seminar have often said, I love flying IFR, but the VFR stuff scares me, so that's why I'm here.
Yeah. And I know Scott Hutchinson, also on Pat's payroll, has come in and said he was out of flying for 15 years, then went to a Rusty Pilot seminar. That led to getting back into flying, getting his CFI and CFII. He sends people to Pat's seminars all the time, and we appreciate that. I'm not sure if you pay him out of your marketing budget, Pat, or if it's just something else, but hey, it's working.
You actually met Scott. He was one of the guys I brought by the AOPA tent at Sun and Fun. So you met Scott. Scott and I
big guy.
Frequently. Yeah.
See, I pay attention.
Yeah.
Mark Scott. I got it. Hey, well, this leads us right into the instrument proficiency check, because as Pat and Kay were saying, and it's very true, the VFR world and the IFR world are very different. So one of the reasons we see corporate pilots, commercial pilots, people who are really involved in flying instruments in Rusty Pilots is because they're very good at flying in the system in Boeing and Airbus equipment. But when you get down into Cessnas and Pipers and Aero Commanders and things like that, they've not flown VFR in many years. instruments are very much the same. For those of us who came from the VFR world and go into instruments, maybe we don't keep up with it as best we can. Pat, when does it become necessary for me to do an IPC rather than just being current? And we, of course, we can always do an IPC just because we want to, but when do I have to?
If you're talking about a formal IPC, it would be if you've been out of currency for more than a year. So if you're out of currency for, let's say, 6 months, you can grab a safety pilot or a flight instructor or a DPE for that matter, and just go out and do your 6 hits, they call them. The approaches, the holding, the intercepting and tracking, et cetera. And at least you're legally current. Legally current doesn't necessarily mean you're proficient, but you're at least legally current. But if you go more than a year, then you actually have to do a formal IPC. And that is with a flight instructor. You can go with a DPE. Again, it's not a check ride. It's not a check ride. You can't fail it. But you'll have to do that after a year.
You know, I'm really glad you mentioned that distinction between currency and proficiency, because they're very different things. And Kay, one of the things I find admirable about you is when you do the IPC, you don't just do a bunch of ILSs. You mix it up, don't you? Because you want the full spectrum. You want more going on in your world.
Correct. So when I am the student and I'm doing an IPC for me, and I do IPCs every 6 months because I don't, up here in California, I don't get a whole lot of actual time. However, I absolutely need to use my instrument rating because otherwise I'll be grounded here more than half the time with the marine layer and an intermittent IMC, but I don't get a lengthy amount of IMC time. So that's one of the reasons I do an IPC every 6 months. But I like to mix it up and do a precision approach and a non-precision approach using the automation and then the same hand flying. They both are really important to me, particularly when you get into more complex airplanes. The buttonology itself will throw you off big time. I mean, that is a lesson by itself. And so to make sure that you're, kind of sharp on that, particularly for instrument flying, make sure that you're able to use the automation, but then fly it, hand fly it also, because you might be better in one category or the other. I know some pilots who don't really want to use the automation and they want to hand fly the whole thing, but then they're not, maximizing the equipment on board. If you got a good autopilot, and I use a Garmin GFC 700, it's really a powerful autopilot. It's a great one, but you got to use it, and you have to know about automation management. If you don't, it's going to get you. And so this is the opportunity to practice that. And then there's some pilots who always use the autopilot and rarely hand fly, and that's not good either. So you really need to mix that up.
Now, Pat, along those lines about technology, if I come to you for an instrument proficiency check and I'm flying an old 172B model and all I've got is one VOR, can I do an instrument proficiency check in that airplane?
Sure, absolutely. That's the short answer. Yes, you can.
Yeah. So it
would be nice. That's right. It would be nice if that old radio that has the nav, has a glide slope, so that you can go try to fly a precision approach. That would be nice. But there's nothing that says that you can't do an IPC with the airplane that is equipped the way you typically fly. So if you typically fly with an old coffee grinder radio, which today is illegal because of the number of channels and all that. But if you fly with a coffee grinder radio and that's all you have, and that's all you've ever flown with, and that's what you've got.
In the comments for those watching, if your instrument current, go ahead and put in me. If your instrument current, be curious. And yeah, Kay, that's the reason I asked Pat that question is much like with the flight review where people start thinking, it's this. It can really be anything you want it to be. And much like the IPC, if I'm flying a very old aircraft that's got very basic avionics, but it is capable of doing a VOR approach or a localizer approach, I can use that aircraft. And on the other end of the spectrum, if I'm in a Cirrus with a glass panel and an autopilot, I can use that. The thing is, can I use all the equipment available in the aircraft effectively? That's kind of what we're looking for, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. And when I did my instrument rating way back a few decades ago, I had an ADF, and I actually had to shoot an NDB approach on my instrument check ride. Now, if that ADF didn't work and it was placarded as in-op, I wouldn't have needed to do the NDB approach. But because it was there, that was something I needed to demonstrate. And the same goes now. Whatever airplane you're flying, you got to know how to use all the equipment that's available to you.
I can relate to UK because for my instrument check ride, I had to do an NDB approach too.
And it was a windy day. It was really hard.
I liked them. I'm probably a dinosaur, but I liked NDB approaches. Boy, if you didn't have your act together and really understand where the wind is coming from and what it's doing to you and your situational awareness, because all this was prior to GPS being just ubiquitous, there was a lot to be said for an NDB approach, really. And they're still in existence, by the way, in some places.
I'll tell you, in 1990, 91, I was down in Miami flying the 747 sims at the Pan Am facility, back when Pan Am still existed. And there was a whole bunch of Pan Am pilots who were signing up for the sims for doing NDB approaches, because they haven't done one in years. And they were going to the Middle East. They had a contract to pick up soldiers and bring them back. And they just had NDB approaches there. So, yeah, it's always worth keeping up to speed. By the way, we've got Larry R., Mary Martin, Tiffany Sams, and Scott Hutchinson, all are CFIs or instrument current here. I want to ask a question of you. For those of you watching, because we really do care about what you think, type in the comments a topic you'd like to see us address in the future. Otherwise, Pat or Kay is going to make me do something that I probably don't want to do, because they're very mean when they're not here. I mean, they seem nice here, but very mean people. Tell us what you would like to see us cover, and it's entirely possible we'll do it. Now, Pat, I'm gonna potentially embarrass you here, because you did aviation a huge favor. You were actually involved in getting some clarification on the IFR, the instrument check ride, the 3 different approaches. Does that interpretation of the rule apply to an instrument proficiency check, or is that just for getting your certification in the first place?
Well, let me try to answer that first of all, some context. For a number of years, there was an interpretation out there that said for your long instrument cross country, you had to do 3 different approaches using different instrument systems during different landing systems. And the interpretation said that an ILS and a localizer were the same system. All the GPS approaches are the same system. And so we would have people coming to us for a check ride that on their long cross country, they did an ILS, a localizer, and a VOR. Let's say an ILS, a localizer, and a GPS or something like that. Well, according to this interpretation, that was 2 different systems, the ILS and the localizer being one, and the VOR or the GPS being the other. And I actually turned away a check ride on that basis several months ago, and the instructor here in Houston, Mike Meadows is his name, said, that's not right. And I said, I agree with you, it's not right. He said, we need to get that changed. I said, well, I'll put you in touch with AOPA, the appropriate people there, and let's see what they can do. And lo and behold, about 6 months later, he texted me and he said, we just got that policy rescinded. And the FAA just doesn't rescind policies. And they rescinded that policy, saying that it was, in fact, an incorrect interpretation. So the bottom line now is for both your check ride, the actual practical exam where you're riding with a DPE, and for the long 250-mile cross country, you just have to do 3 different approaches. Now, having said that, the ACS does say that for the purpose of the check ride, the 2 non-precision approaches have to use different systems. So you can't do like an LNAV approach and an LP approach or something like that, which are both GPS systems. So you could do an ILS, or you could do an LPV approach to substitute for an ILS under certain circumstances. But your non-precision approaches would have to be, for example, a GPS approach or a localizer approach or a VOR approach or any combination thereof, but it can't be 2 different types of GPS approaches. So I hope that's the longer answer to the question. Hope that's clear.
No, I like it. I like it a lot. And it brings us to a thing, I'm also dinosaur-like. I'm 87 years old. You probably can't tell because there's special lighting in my makeup, people, but I'm extraordinarily old. I also got my instrument with an NDB hold and approach. If I decide, if that's what I've been doing, flying that old coffee grinder radio, and I've just been doing localizer approaches for years. Pat, can I come to you and I say, I want to fly something with a glass panel. I want to learn how to do GPS approaches. I want to do LPVs. I want to do stuff just with the GPS. Can I do that as part of an instrument proficiency check?
Sure, and you can wrap it into a flight review as well. Oftentimes the question is, can my IPC count as my flight review? And once again, the answer is absolutely it can. Just make sure that your flight instructor knows that that's what you want it to do so that he or she can make sure that they're covering the things that they need to in terms of Part 61. But yes, absolutely. If somebody wants to use learning how to fly a glass panel, for example, as a part of that IPC, thumbs up, go ahead.
I think this is the big takeaway from this episode, Kay, that whether we're talking about a flight review, whether we're talking about an instrument proficiency check, this is an instructional opportunity for each of us that seeks these out. We can do it every 24 months, or we can do the IPC after being out of currency for a year, or we can just do it anytime we want to become better at what we do. So it really is, Kay, up to the individual client to go into that school, that club, whatever, pick the CFI they want to work with and tell them what they want to achieve, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't have to be up to the CFI or the school to define it. It can be up to us to say, this is what I want to work on.
I agree. And actually, I would go one step further and say it really is the pilot's responsibility to say, hey, I want to focus on this. This is where we got that term focused flight review, because it's what you want to focus on. And just communicate that with your CFI. And I don't know any CFIs that are going to say, well, that's what you want to do. No, we're not going to do that. And if you come across a CFI like that, then find another CFI. So most of them will more than embrace what your interest is. And they'll make sure that they do their due diligence in complying with the standards that need to be met, but they'll certainly take into account what you'd like to work on. And so be prepared about that. It doesn't take that much effort.
And by the way, there's also, and I'm drawing a blank now as to the number on it, but there is a quite an extensive advisory circular that the FAA has out. Google, I'm sure, will find it for you, on the elements of a good flight review and IPC. So just a quick Google search, I'm sure, will yield that, but I just can't remember right offhand what the number is.
I like it. And by the way, Vicki Croston makes a very interesting comment here about ATC communications. Pat and I have railed about this with Last Call before, but she says good radio work is lacking a lot these days. Highlight the recording of the instructor arguing with ATC to excess. Just wow. And Tiffany Sams, and I'm becoming a big Tiffany Sams fan tonight. She gives a big thumbs up 3 times or number one. So that being the case, I have 2 things to share with you. Right now, live on generalaviationnews.com is a column I wrote on that exact topic. And because Tiffany Sams and Vicki Croston are so just unbelievable and brought it up out of the blue, I will send each of you this official AOPA hat, which 2 of 3 ambassadors frequently wear because of our very high and tight hairstyle. So if you will send, seriously, Vicki and Tiffany, if you will send your address to ambassadors@aopa.org, send a mailing address to ambassadors@aopa.org. I will mail you each a hat with my sincere thanks for participating tonight and just being the visionaries who foresaw what I was going to write my column about this week. I don't know how it happens.
Oh, and just one quick thing about Vicki. Vicki is a skydiver. A bunch of, I don't remember how many jumps she's got under her, but her mother was one of the original Rosie the Riveters. And
oh, wow.
Really fast at building World War II airplanes. So I think that's just one of the really cool things about Vicki and Vicki's background. And
That
then,
is awesome.
and if I can just answer Eric Pittman real quick, he says, from last episode, did that lady that you introduced recover from being embarrassed to being live on the internet instead of thinking she was on a conference call? And the answer is, we went and had an adult beverage and we had a laugh about it. And Eric, if you will Google Debbie Reen, R-I-H-N, Debbie Reen, you'll find out. Well, Vicki just said the original Rosie, and so I stand corrected. But if you will Google Debbie, D-E-B-B-Y, Reen, R-I-H-N, you'll see just who that lady is. She's pretty amazing.
I gotta say, I appreciate Eric bringing that up. It was the funniest thing in the world. We are on Facebook on the AOPA page, group, whatever, and YouTube on the AOPA live page. You can go back and see the previous episode from 2 weeks ago. Pat did inadvertently. He did not do it on purpose. She thought she was talking to just Pat and I, when she's actually talking to a couple thousand people. So that was excellent. I really loved that.
Pretty funny, I have to tell you.
So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Kay, do you have any parting comments on any aspect of what we've covered tonight from your position out there in Southern California, holding down the cool factor for all the rest of us?
Take the flight review as an opportunity to learn and have some fun with it. Don't worry so much about, I must do this, I must do that. Just think about what you want to do, and then make sure you convey that to your instructor, and you'll really enjoy every flight review.
Pat, would you like to share words of wisdom or continue reading the FAR AIM to our audience before you depart?
In the beginning, the FAA created, no, just in the words of the infamous words, immortal words of Blue Oyster Cult, don't fear the Reaper. There's nothing that we're going to do to other than insist that you use more cowbell. There's nothing that we're going to do to make you fail your flight review. You can't fail it. So just look for it. Look at it as a learning process. Have some fun with it, really. When you're sitting in the airplane with us as CFIs, we just want to go fly. We want to help you. We want to have fun, but we want to have fun doing it. So we take it seriously, but hey, let's have some fun with it.
That's an interesting point. I don't think I ever consciously thought about, but we're not judging you. We're kind of having some fun in the fact that I've been doing this for decades, and maybe you've been doing this for a shorter time, and maybe I know something that makes this a little easier, even if I'm sure both of you have dealt with that, where you've got somebody doing steep turns and they think they have to do it without trim to show their talent. And it's like, no. Trim it up. Make it easy. That's what this is all about. And Tiffany Sams, I really am now a fan. I'm going to start a fan club. I have a fever. The only cure is more cowbell. Pat, you started something. Folks, I can't thank you enough for tuning in tonight. Wonderful sense of humor. Great feedback from y'all. I do appreciate it, and I'm not kidding. If you shoot us a message or if you email us at ambassadors@aopa.org, tell us a topic that you're really interested in. We really do this for you. It's really something we enjoy tremendously. But if you get something out of it, that just raise your hand, send in an email, and say you want to see that, we'll do it. Please do me a little bit of a favor. Click the like button. And if you're an Uber fan, if you're just like, wow, that Pat Brown's really something, and he really is. Go ahead and share the link to this episode on whichever platform you're using. Let folks know you got some benefit out of it. We really do appreciate it. I've got to thank Rebecca Boone in the background, who produced tonight's episode and just did a fantastic job. Donnie McKay, the mentor to us all, makes things happen. And by the way, for those of you doing rusty pilot things, Donnie McKay's the guy that makes it happen. Eric Pittman says, thank you, Bernard C. Great show, folks. Thank you for your good ideas and points. He's got the cowbell now. And I just had a great time. Come back and see us next time, May 10th, Tuesday, May 10th, second and fourth Tuesday every month, 7 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock if you live in Pat's neighborhood, 4 o'clock for the folks out where Kay lives. Come see us. We'll be talking about something interesting, and it's all about you. So we'll see you next time. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.